Hello again everyone and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John and as always thank you so much for being here. A good topic, let's do it. Have you ever had to call 911 before? If so, what happened? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I live on a lake and the other day I was shocked to see a massive plume of dark smoke coming off the top of a house across the water. I waited and waited for it to subside, but it only got worse. I called 911 eventually and reported it. They demanded a street address, and I had no way of knowing because it was across a lake. They refused to send help because I couldn't name the street. I told them to Google map it, and I could help, and as we were trying to figure it out together, the smoke cleared, and all slowly returned to normal. It was scary enough seeing the smoke, but even scarier knowing I couldn't get immediate help if it had been as severe as it looked. In college, I lived in a fraternity house. One night, at about 2 a.m., one of my friends and I were still up and hanging out in the main public area of our house playing pool. Someone knocks loudly at the door, and we look outside. So cold in winter, a woman stands there without pants and a shirt too big for her. We let her in and she's hysterical. We get her a blanket and let her calm down on a couch. I call 911 and the cops are there pretty fast, about 5 to 10 minutes. We come to find out she was kidnapped 3 days earlier and had been barred and held prisoner in an abandoned house across the street from ours. That was an intriguing few days, to say the least. I watched 2 guys shoot at some guy running away right outside my window a few months back. They shot from about 3 feet from my window. I called 911 and they showed up pretty quickly. They failed to take a statement, told me they thought it was a taser, and ignored me completely. The following night, another police officer arrived and performed his duties effectively, confirming that they had discovered the casing the morning of and that my description of the shooters aligned with the victim's description. They were able to locate the guys a week or 2 later. Driving home on a rainy night with my mom back in high school, I saw some lights on the side of a hill just off the road. They were kind of dancing around. My mom asked, "What's that?" I thought for a second, trying to figure it out, then replied, "It's a car flipping over." Apparently the driver had gone off the road and rolled down the hill. We called 911 and a few other people stopped to help out. The driver had been reaching for a CD below her seat and failed to make the turn. Another time, I was driving on the freeway when the electrical system on my motorcycle completely blew out, killed everything, including the engine. Since I was in the fast lane in traffic, I had to pull over into the center divider. I called 911 and they sent a police officer to stop the entire freeway for me as I pushed my bike across. That was kinda cool. On Monday, someone stole my bike from my front porch. Recently, my street has seen a significant increase in crime, including acts of vandalism, and I believe that reporting these crimes could potentially prompt the police department to deploy a patrol in my neighborhood. I called the non-emergency line and explained what happened. He said, "Call 911, that's what it's for." So I called 911 for a stolen bike, even though it wasn't an emergency, and I expect little to come of it. Side note, one thing I noticed when I dialed was that my stupid Windows mobile phone refused to make the connection. It made 3 very loud beeps, and then said in red letters, "Emergency mode, press space to exit." All the other buttons were disabled, so I pressed space and tried again. After a 3rd try, it managed to get through. I'm not sure what this error is, but I get the feeling that it does more harm than good. I can imagine how frustrating that would be in a real emergency. I was walking my dog in the park, Brooklyn, New York, and saw a huge rolling fight come around the corner of the street. 3 or 4 guys were really beating up another 2 who were struggling to get away. I called 911. I gave a description and location. and the operator went away for about 30 seconds. She came back, and I was still spelling my last name when a cop car screamed past me, driving the wrong way, up a one-way street in the direction of the rolling fight. It was pretty badass. Another time I called 911 because about 30 people just started hanging out in the street outside my building, drinking, smoking, and laughing. And a few of them were wandering inside the gate, checking doors to the different stairwells. Cops came, chatted, they left. Very sedate. I once had to call my mom because her blood sugar dropped, indicating that she may have had a seizure or something related to her diabetes. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and I was in my room playing Metroid before school, waiting for my mom to yell at me to leave for school like she normally would. I began to notice that I had progressed further in Metroid than usual, so I ventured into the living room to investigate. To my surprise, she was exhibiting unusual behavior. The recliner was covered in urine, and she was stumbling around, slurring incoherent words. Fear gripped me, so I did the only thing I could think of. I called 911. They sent out the firefighters and made her eat a cookie, and she started to come back to normal. I called 911 because there were shots fired on the street next to my apartment. I was out back on my porch when the shots rang out. I could even hear the distinct crack of the bullet as it zoomed overhead. I crouched, pushed my girl inside, and told her to get down. Then I dialed 911. 911 operator. How do you know that there were shots fired? Me. I'm a veteran of Iraq. I believe I'm familiar with the sound of gunfire. 911 operator. Okay, sir, we've got units on the way. So, about 20 minutes later, I live in the downtown area of my town. One squad car rolls by. The squad car passes by without even stopping. Doesn't knock on my door. Then I get a call back from the operator. 911 operator. I just wanted to let you know that what you heard were firecrackers. 2 independent witnesses corroborated it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Essentially, the police neglected their duties and came to the realization that they were powerless to intervene. Checked the street for brass. Then they try to get FPs off the casings. So they called me and lied, hoping to calm me down. It didn't help. It only made the situation worse. Made me second-guess my judgment. Made me feel like a crazy vet with flashbacks. I already know I have PTSD. Don't make it worse, assholes. Not that they could have known or did it maliciously. Driving through D.C. on the way home from a party, I saw a man in the street with his arm around another man's neck, dragging him. 3 women were pulling on the choking man's arm, screaming, "You're killing him, you're killing him." I called 911 and was on hold, listening to a recorded message for a good 30 seconds before someone answered. Fine for me, but not if I were, say, the man losing the fight, trying to call for help. I then reported what I saw, and the operator responded with a tired, slightly sarcastic, "We already know. It has been reported. Police are on their way." As if I were deliberately wasting her time, reporting something that I knew someone else already called in about. The police did arrive shortly thereafter, though, and both men ran away. I don't know what happened after that. I arrived home early from my out-of-town trip to find my little underage sister hosting a house party, except she was passed out drunk in her room, and there were people 8 years older than her there in my house, smoking and playing my vintage guitars with busted beer can tabs. I called the cops and told everyone to leave, before a long fight broke out on my front lawn, with people fighting and people I didn't know threatening me in my own house. At this point, I called the cops again. I had to call some football buddies to come over and help. It took them 8 minutes to get there, and another 45 minutes to get everyone out of the house. They resided halfway across the city. I called the cops a 3rd time to complain and let them know that drunk underage kids were speeding down my street. Everyone had left, except for my friends, and my sister was still unconscious in her room. The cops finally showed up 2 hours after the initial call. They came and knocked on the door. I yelled at them what took so long, as everyone had been gone for over an hour. Afterwards, they inquired as to why I had contacted them and threatened to issue me a ticket for wasting police time or some other nonsense. It should be noted that the police station had cruisers there when I was driving home and is less than a 2-minute drive from my house. Of course, the next time I saw them was at 6 in the morning a year later, about a month ago, when they started pounding on my door. Mom answered the door, and they not only invited themselves in, but told my frail aging mother to sit down as they came down to my room in the basement, woke me up, shined a flashlight in my face, and went through my shit in my room. This all happened because apparently a blue truck had been involved in a robbery of a pizza shop 2 blocks away, and I had a blue truck in my driveway, and they said they could see glass in the cab. There was no glass, not at all, not even a hint. They illegally trespassed in my home and didn't even have the courtesy to take their dirty fucking boots off, and intimidated my 80-year-old parents. This incident occurred due to the presence of a blue truck parked in our driveway. On the way out, I requested their names and badge numbers, to which they responded, "I don't need to know that." And the most infuriating part about it is that there isn't a damn thing I could do about it because there's no one to complain to except other cops, who, if I did, would not open a case, would not investigate it, and would most likely send more cops down to harass me and my family, knowing that we have absolutely no recourse. Now, tell me why I should say anything other than the worthless, corrupt mother police force. I've called 911 myself, mostly for car accidents while driving, and one time, which is a story that's very personal to me, my father, who's long since passed away, actually called 911 in a haze. I don't want to get too much away, but he called it on me, completely unfounded. But I was visiting my parents while I was home on leave from the military, and I look out my bedroom window, and I saw a SWAT team with dudes with what looked like M16s at the time. This is in the late 90s, running through my front yard, and I peek out the window like, get down, get down. I didn't know what was going on, but that really happened to me. It was a big misunderstanding. I'll keep the rest to myself. Maybe I'll tell about it one day, but it was wild. I was impacted by domestic violence in my family when I was 10 years old. Last summer, when I was dropping off my son to his mother, a car flipped in front of the house, and the ideal one, 3 years ago, headed to court, first snowfall of the year. I decided to drive my winter beater instead of my brand new car. On the way home, I'm stopped at a stop sign when a half-ton Chevy rear ends me at 40 miles per hour because he can't stop on the snow. He bounces off my car, pushing me into the ditch and hitting another car head-on. I wake up in the ditch, find my phone, and call 911. I refuse medical attention. All other parties go to the hospital via ambulance, and all other vehicles get towed away. After successfully exiting the ditch, a state trooper instructs me to return home. Now, this car is in rough shape. The trunk doesn't close, there are no taillights, and there's no rear window. The cop let me drive home in the dark that way. The best part of the situation was I paid $400 for the car, drove it all winter, totaled it, and was paid $800 in insurance. Well, it was winter and I had been having a snowball fight with a few friends of mine late at night, 2 a.m.ish. We get too bored or cold and decide to go to someone's house. But a friend of mine stashed one of the snowballs in his coat pocket. Right as we were leaving the parking lot, he said, "Watch this," and threw a snowball at a group of teenagers, obviously hanging around with their parents' car, pretending to be cool. Well, the snowball hit one of the cars. No harm done, it's snow. And before he could say anything or apologize, these teenagers got into their cars and started chasing us. For God knows what reason. They had eggs and other things readily available in their car and were chucking them out the window. My friend is a pretty competent driver, so he tried to lose them a couple of times. He managed to lose one of them, but stoplights ended up making it impossible. Eventually, one of them in a BMW, shocker, cuts us off directly in front of us at a stop sign. The others were a bit farther back, so my friend tried to back up, but in that time, another kid in his dad's Mercedes SUV had tried to box him in and was right behind us, but the idiot had turned off his headlights, and our windows were obscured by eggs and such. So we end up backing into it. The last car stops directly beside us, so we couldn't move anywhere, and they all get out of their cars and bang and kick on the windows and doors trying to get in, yelling things, quite the overreaction to a snowball. So since we couldn't exactly go anywhere, and there were 4 of us and more like 15 of them, I called the police. When they saw what we were doing, they wanted to look as innocent as possible, and the guy cutting us off, very obviously, he was perpendicular, moved his car, and the guy beside us moved his car. However, the eggs remained on the windows, and the cop was unimpressed when he saw our car and heard it was a snowball. Of course, the kid in the Mercedes was bawling because his dad was going to kill him, and he was like, "I need your insurance information." And the cop just told them to piss off unless they wanted their parents to hear about why it happened. I've only had to call 911 once, and that was because my dad had the Beetle for the last 46 years. I was getting ready for school one morning. I was about 11 at the time, and he was acting really strangely, making erratic statements, sort of babbling incoherently, etc. Since I had heard my mom describe some of the symptoms of insulin shock, I decided I would get him some juice, in the hopes that it would bring his blood sugar levels up far enough to stop his pending fall from consciousness. Cran grape, man. I'll never forget that. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. I went to brush my teeth before we were supposed to be leaving, and when I came back, my dad was just standing in his bedroom, staring blankly at the wall. I said, "Dad, are you okay?" He replied, "What?" I repeated the question, he repeated the answer, and then promptly fell to the ground. I rushed over to him and found that he was still breathing, but was completely unconscious. To make matters worse, he ended up lying on his back, in danger of swallowing his tongue. I immediately called 911 to see what I could do to try to help him out. Obviously, as an 11-year-old boy, there wasn't a whole lot. They advised me to grab his belt loop and reorient him so that he was lying on his side in order to prevent him from choking on his tongue. They sent a fire truck and an ambulance out there, and he was back in action within 15 minutes of their arrival at the house. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my entire life. It was an instinctive response, and I'm grateful every day for my ability to intervene and avert a potentially fatal situation. The whole ordeal ruined my relationship with my father for about 9 years, but that's about a story for another time, and we have since reconciled. We're now on a pool team together and shoot in weekly matches on Thursday nights. I'm really glad I have him back, and even more so that I didn't lose him that day. I've had to call 911 twice, both while at work. On both occasions I was managing the card room that I work at, just kind of standing around, hanging out, waiting for me to have to do something. Our members go outside to smoke, and all I could see, 4 or 5 of them all staring in the same direction, which always means that there's something going on down the street. We're half a block away from half a dozen bars in a college town. It gets entertaining. I poke my head out of the door and see a guy about 20 yards down the street on the sidewalk, curled into the fetal position, with 7 to 8 guys around him, kicking the crap out of him. By the time I could get on the line with the dispatch, the fight had broken up, but a couple of squad cars came down to try and sort things out. The next thing, we had a man come in. He was obviously drunk, but he repeatedly claimed to have had a seizure and asked me to call 911 for him, which is exactly what I did. An ambulance showed up a few minutes later with a couple of squad cars in tow. The EMTs and police questioned the man for a while and then carted him into the ambulance and made him leave. As they were getting ready to leave, one of the members of the club, who had left to go grab a late dinner, called and told me that the police weren't letting her on the same block as the card room. I thought it was weird that they had blocked off an entire block for a fairly simple ambulance pickup. I poked my head back outside, and the officer asked me to step back inside and then informed me that there was a suspicious package in the alley nearby, and somebody had informed downtown security that he had left a bomb in it. I got a front row seat out of my window of the bomb squad showing up and preparing their gear for disposal of the package, which they did with a high-pressure water cannon. They wouldn't let me watch, but we definitely did hear. The best part was that no one could enter or exit the area. I had players to buy in or cash out, so I essentially had no work to do. Both of these incidents occurred on consecutive days, marking the first instance in which the owner, manager, and my other assistant manager were all out of state. Good times. Our house fire was the first time 911 experience for you. Wow, I don't know if I knew that. When I was a kid and my parents first divorced, my mom and I moved into a cheap apartment in a spectacularly shitty part of our little town. Many years later, after I graduated from high school and was able to move out on my own, I moved into the same spectacularly shitty neighborhood, just 6 blocks from where we had lived when I was a kid. About 2 weeks later, after I had moved into my apartment, a friend was visiting and we were smoking cigarettes on the front stoop. Told you it was a shitty hood. When we heard the distinct sound of someone getting the shit beaten out of him around the corner from my place at the 7-Eleven. The car sped away, and then we could hear a Hispanic gentleman saying, "Help me." We looked around the corner and saw a woman with her arm in a cast, drunkenly wandering around the parking lot and crying while trying to help her male friend. I ran inside and called 911, explaining that there was a man with a head injury in the 7-Eleven parking lot who had just been beaten up by some guys who took off. About 5 minutes later, a police officer arrived and propped up the injured man, causing his profusely bleeding head to rub against the side of the police car. The guy was leaning against the car, just repeating, "Help me, please help me." It took the ambulance another 15 minutes to get there, and they stopped for a red light right by the 7-Eleven. I couldn't believe it. If it had been me, now, I would have gone over and yelled at the cop for not taking the guy's injuries seriously. But I was 18 and barely out on my own, so I just stood there horrified. I lived in that apartment for 6 years. While I lived there, I called 911 and the non-emergency dispatch many times. In fact, the neighborhood had quite a horrible gang problem that the police were in denial about for years. But they did finally get serious about 2 years before I left. At the time, they installed a small cop shop in the strip mall across from my apartment. One night, I saw a man standing at the mouth of the complex driveway. A few minutes passed, and a woman walked up and very obviously bought drugs from him. I called the non-emergency police dispatch and told them that if they alerted the cops in that station about it right now, there was a guy selling drugs that they could arrest without even getting in the car. The dispatcher told me, "There's no one at that station, ma'am." I said, "No, I can see cops walking around in there. I live across the street." He said, "No, ma'am, you just see their cars." I said something like, "Well, those cars look an awful lot like a female officer sitting at a desk and a male officer at the copy machine." He kept insisting that I didn't see anyone, so I gave up. But he must have thought about it, because about 3 minutes later, the female officer walked right over and cuffed the dude. To give you an idea of how much the police in my hometown finally grew up during the time I lived in this apartment, here's my last story. About 2 weeks before I moved out, an old boyfriend stopped by to visit. He ran up to the 7-Eleven to get some smokes, but he returned in about 90 seconds, telling me he had just seen someone get stabbed in the parking lot across from my place. I called 911 and gave them all the info, and within 5 minutes, they had the street blocked off, 2 ambulances arrived, and about 6 cop cars were over there flashing their lights and looking for the suspect. I must admit that I was surprised the dispatcher didn't tell me I had seen a magic uniform or something, and not a guy getting stabbed, based on my previous experiences. I remember thinking, well, of course they figure this shit out right before I leave the place. I've also had to call the aforementioned house fire for an ambulance for my mother once when I was a kid, and once for a coworker who had a seizure at her desk, and they got very angry at us for calling the paramedics, even though she had never told us she was epileptic. I've also had to call the rural non-emergency dispatch now that we live out in the sticks when an entire hillside was on fire during my drive home. The dispatcher was really cool and actually stayed on the phone with me for about 15 minutes while she checked to see if it was a controlled burn. It was. There's a significant distinction between individuals in rural areas who receive fewer calls and those in suburban areas who feel the need to correct the dispatcher when she mentions seeing police in the station. Calling for emergency help is always a little weird. Worked at the YMCA after school program, and I was watching kids outside. I was standing about 20 feet from one kid playing tetherball, and he kept pulling on the rope. I told him to quit a few times already, and I was keeping my eyes on him so I could yell at him again. I turned away for just a second to talk to another kid, and when I turned around, that little bastard had pulled the entire pole down on top of himself. I went to pull the pole off when I noticed that the metal hook where you tie the rope to the pole was in his goddamn forehead. I'd pulled the pole off of him before realizing what was going on, and what I was left with was a kid staring wild-eyed at me and blood gushing out of the front of his head. I threw my palm over it, picked him up, and with blood all over me, ran toward the door to go inside. As I was running in with this kid in my arms, I remember seeing all the faces of the other 50 kids staring at me. Once inside, I yelled for another counselor to call 911, but they weren't as close as I was when I entered. So, with the bleeding child in hand, I picked up the phone and called. Driving at night in DC, we stopped at a red light at a four-way intersection. Suddenly, a station wagon came speeding by my car, trying to run the red light at a high velocity. In the middle of the intersection, the other car, driving in the opposite direction, smacked us hard, causing parts to fly off both cars. The station wagon, which was hit by an Escalade, performed at least 3 barrel rolls before finally landing on its top. After about 10 seconds of sitting in shock because of what had just happened, 6 people crawled out of the station wagon, and one threw up and passed out, and another grabbed his shoulder. He broke his collarbone. I had called 911 by then, and then left to go help these people. I didn't witness anyone exit the Escalade. Right after Thanksgiving, I took a train to visit my boyfriend. He was working at a bar at the time, so his mother picked me up to drop me off at said bar. While we were driving, she started panicking, grabbing her chest and saying, "Oh my God," repeatedly, shaking all over. She pulled over to the side of the road, saying she was having a heart attack. I tried to calm her down, got my phone out and dialed 911, while running to the corner to find out what street we were on. The ambulance shows up a short time later. The EMTs load her in, and I sit in the back, dialing the bar, my boyfriend's phone, and my boyfriend's friends, trying to reach him. The owner of the bar finally picked up, and I managed to alert my boyfriend and his brother. I sat with her in the emergency room until her children showed up. She did indeed have a heart attack. The scariest part about this is that we were driving to the hospital. His mother started shouting her husband's name, who died several years prior. Scary shit. My friend was driving me home when out of a blind driveway came flying a young kid on his bicycle. We had no time to stop. He struck the front right fender of the car, smashed out the windshield, and continued to roll over the top of the car, denting that with his head. My friend stopped the car and we both ran out to discover his lifeless, crooked body alongside the ditch by his mangled bicycle. His shoulder was at an unnatural angle, and there was blood coming out of his ear and mouth. Neither of us had cell phones on us, so we ran to the nearest house, banging on the door, screaming our heads off. We were certain the kid was dead. The homeowner called 911 for us, and paramedics arrived within minutes. The kid was fortunately not dead, but had to spend the next 4 months in a coma and also relearn some basic skills I remember hearing. We also learned that he did not have his helmet strapped on, so at the point of impact, the force sent the helmet partway off his head, exposing his forehead, which struck the roof of the car, hence the coma. He's lucky we were only going 25 or so. I've called when I saw a kid being jumped by another time, when I was driving home at like 3 a.m. and a bunch of kids appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the street and wouldn't get out and get mad at me for flashing my lights and honking my horn after I slammed on my brakes to avoid them. Oh yeah, they were in dark clothes, making it even harder to see them. And one time, completely unrelated, I barely saw a cop car going like 70 down a street with its lights and siren on. I later saw a half dozen cop cars parked haphazardly across the street, blocking off half of it. Turns out, a house was being robbed, and they ended up catching the robber. So my city's police do at least a semi-good job. So I'm pretty sure they got the kids jumping on that one kid. I didn't stop because I was afraid they'd jump me too. After my friend blacked out and jumped out of a third-story window, breaking his back and heel, I called 911. My friends and I would still do or play a drinking game called PTB, Pass the Bottle. When a round leader starts with a bottle of Old Thompson whiskey, the best there is, and takes a swill, everyone swiftly passes the bottle around until it returns to the leader. The process continues until the leader expresses a desire to cease. This friend was visiting and couldn't really handle the 10 or so shots we took in about 5 minutes, not drinking every day like we would during the summer. He blacks out, and we go to a party, and I kind of forget about him. We locate him, return to the house we were at, and discover that he is extremely intoxicated. We wrestle a bit and make fun of him, and he ends up hiding in the bathroom. We all went about making food or passing out when I heard a loud bang from the bathroom. I force open the door, which was secured, and anticipate his appearance to initiate an altercation with me. I see the windows open, and he's on the ground 3 stories down, moaning. I call 911 and rush down to help him. He says he's fine, and I actually believed him, being pretty drunk, even though I asked the operator to cancel the ambulance. She said it would come by for safety. The paramedics arrive, and he says he's fine, and that they can leave. After assessing the severity of this fall, they insist on taking him to the hospital. We wake up in the morning and visit him in the hospital. His parents were there, and it was pretty awkward. He'd almost died. Needless to say, he didn't make it to the festival we were planning on going to in Chicago. I called 911 once. The neighbors in the apartment above mine were watching TV, and then I heard loud yelling and a really, really loud thud onto their floor. Then everything upstairs got really silent. The TV turned off, and there was no more yelling. Then the shower and sink started running, and I got freaked out and called the cops. I was pretty sure they were drug addicts anyway, and was worried one of the guys had seriously hurt his girlfriend. Cops came and banged on their door for about 5 minutes straight, yelling that they were the police and to open the door. The whole time the cops were banging on the door, the shower and sink were still running, but then I could hear the neighbors walking around, the creaking of their floorboards. Eventually they opened the door for the police. The police chatted with them for about 2 minutes and then came downstairs to talk to me. I told them what I had heard clearly from my apartment. The police told me that there was only one person home upstairs, and that he said he had just gotten really excited about a football game and then went to go take a shower. Then the police left. I don't know if the neighbor upstairs lied because he had just seriously hurt or killed someone, or because he had a bunch of drug paraphernalia lying around, or if one of them had warrants out, but I'm sure there were at least 2 people home that day. He came to my door later that day to apologize, because his girlfriend told him to, which freaked me out more because it meant the cops told him it was me that called. At the time, I was able to kind of just forget about it. But thinking back on it now, I realized that his story didn't add up, no matter which way you try to justify it. And the cops didn't do anything about it.